Hello and welcome to our weekly Integral Love Relationship Web Jam. My name is Martin Utschig and I'm the author of Integral Relationships, a Manual for Men, and my new book, Sex, Purpose, Love, Couples in Integral Relationships Creating a Better World. And the purpose of our weekly web jams, and actually I should say this is the last weekly web jam. We're ending this series and maybe go to once a month or twice a month with special guests. The purpose of these jams is to further the integral love relationship vision. And for our final web jam, I'm honored to have Dr. Bill Epperly as my guest. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Martin. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and we know each other for quite some time through emails. I think you were one of the early people to buy my book, Integral Relationships. So thank you for that. So if you join us live today, we invite you to participate by typing your name and where you join us from and your questions and comments on the bottom right of your screen. And there is Gustav from Germany. Hello, Gustav. Good evening. And if you are single and looking for a partner, you may also share your integralsingles.com screen name or your Facebook profile name so people can check you out and find you. And we also encourage you to join our conversation live if you feel so inclined by clicking on the hand symbol at the top right of your screen. And once I accept your request, a small plugin will be downloaded and the test of your camera and microphone will run before you can come online. And this works best or actually only in Google Chrome, maybe in other browsers, but Google Chrome definitely works. And if you join us live, know that this web jam is recorded and you give your permission to be included in the replay. So Dr. Bill is a former research biochemist who left the lab in pursuit of enlightenment. That reminded me a little bit of Ken Wilber, who also was basically a scientist or being on a scientific path. And you finished, Ken didn't finish, so you got your PhD. And you both then went on a pursuit of enlightenment or asking the bigger questions in life, I guess. And Bill has studied contemplative Christianity and Korean Zen Buddhism. So maybe you can say a few things later what the difference is between Korean and Japanese and Buddhism. And he is a longtime student of Ken Wilber's integral approach to spirituality, probably much longer than I was. Bill offers mindfulness-based coaching and teaches meditation and centering prayer throughout the greater Chicago area. That's where you join us from, including at DePaul University. Bill awoke through the Trillium awakening process, which I'm also very curious to hear about, and serves that community as a mentor. He lives in Chicago with his wife, Claire, 2 blocks from Lake Michigan. And my daughter actually goes to school in Evanston, just up the road from you, so to speak, and to Bean and School of Music. And when she performs on the stage, it's like a big glass stage, and you look over Lake Michigan and see the skyline of Chicago in the back. So I can very well imagine where you live and where you join us from today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we were just at the lake last night to see the beautiful moon and all the city people come out to the lakefront and we have a wonderful sense of communion as we all sit there just in awe and wonder at the beautiful moon. It is an interesting thing that John Kabat-Zinn was also a PhD biochemist and also completed his degree. So there's something about the search for truth that many of us initially take up through, conventional means, right-hand means, that same spirit of inquiry can lead to, inquiry in the subjective realms. And certainly that's been the case for myself as well. And very early in my biochemical training, I had a kind of preliminary awakening, and I lost interest in biochemistry on the spot. And since that time, Not that science is fascinating, endlessly fascinating, but the subjective search, first as a solo enterprise, and then when I got married 17 years ago, then it really becomes interesting when you have two subjectivities in relationship. So delighted to be on the call here today.
Yeah. So that brings up a thought in me that a lot of quantum scientists and micro and biologists, right, people who really go to the smallest particles, or and develop theories. Of course, the smallest particles we cannot really observe, right? We only can speculate about them mathematically. Often also became very interested in mysticism. And were shunned sometimes by the scientific community for making this spiritual turn, as it sometimes is called.
Yes, well, yes, absolutely. And in my case, in high school, I was interested in ultimate questions. What is it to be alive? What is life at the most intimate, finest level? And the religious answers were completely unsatisfying. But I thought that maybe biochemistry could give me some answers. And I imagined the catalytic center of an enzyme being perhaps the smallest level of spark of life that could be studied. And I thought that maybe the 100,000 or so enzymes that we have as humans, maybe studying that would unlock the deepest secrets. And really, it didn't. But it was a great initial way. And then, as Wilbur has so beautifully written, those scientific injunctions, the injunctions of the scientific method, can be applied to the subjective realms just as effectively to enact a practice and gather data and make conclusions based on observation, and then to check them out with the community of the competent. And so I think that I would guess that many naturally curious, all people are somewhat naturally curious, and so it doesn't surprise me that scientists might be great mystics. And although they may not want to use traditional religious language, and so might be just pigeonholed as atheists or this or that, but I see many profound atheistic mystics who have a profound sense of the greater unity behind the scene than you would ever think from their day job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, there's many scientists. My brain is somewhat not really working well right now, but who are very critical of anything religious or spiritual.
Yeah.
And Richard Dawkins comes to mind, and A Universe from Nothing is an interesting book. I forgot the author now. Maybe it comes later to me. Which I read twice, that book. It's quite fascinating. So in your bio, I've obviously you mentioned that you awoke through the Trillium Process, and so I'm curious what was your experience, and how would you describe awakening? Because in my trainings, obviously I have a lot of spiritual parts in there and practices. A lot of people just they have no experience yet of awakening, and so they can only mentally, they want to mentally grasp it.
Yes, of course.
And say, well, explain that to me, or what does that mean?
Well, and for me, it really goes back to my early days in grad school when I went to a talk by David Steindl-Rast, a wonderful Benedictine monk, now 92 years old, and he has a very powerful presence. And for me, it's often been about subtle body or even causal body phenomena that I experience in the presence of a teacher. And there, during his talk on on who is Jesus for us today, I had an
Mhm.
inner illumination that that though I held myself as spiritual but not religious, and might say agnostic or atheist if you pressed me, that I
Mhm.
actually had known what the Christians refer to as God, known and been experiencing that reality my whole life. And without, so just like ripe fruit, his words and presence created an initial sense of just spontaneous opening to a sense of feeling connected to everything,
Mhm.
to a peak experience of connectedness. And I remember looking up at the sky and feeling that the sky and I were in communion. We're looking at each other and looking at favorite trees on the street I lived on in Ann Arbor and feeling connected to the trees. And
Mhm.
even one time, the subject object dualism disappeared for a moment with my test tubes in the lab. And I had the
Mhm.
test tubes looking back at me, and these early kind of subtle energy phenomena.
Mhm.
But so I had that early glimpse, and then that after a long period of, I would say, different practices, Korean Zen, contemplative Christian practice, after a long period of practice of 30, almost 30 years, 20 something years, I met with a Trillium teacher, and her prompts just provoked uh, a, a, a fuller opening than I'd ever experienced at that point, opening to a sense of non-dual awareness where
Mhm.
um, that was just, again, spontaneous through, I would say, the energetic presence of the teacher, but also some prompts that she gave that facilitated my own awareness, focus, and spontaneous opening.
Mhm.
And what I experienced, there were stages to it. What I experienced was an expansion of my awareness to encompass a felt sense of connection to everything
Mhm.
again, which I had experienced that earlier in '87, but it after 6 months or so, I no longer felt that. But
Mhm.
now it came back, and not only that, but there was a loss of any sense of a difference between inner experience and outer experience, or inside and outside.
Mhm.
Those
Mhm.
just seemed like one continuum.
Mhm.
And it was so clear that the externals evoked internal subjective experience, and vice versa. And and then just a sense of easy familiarity with everything and everyone. Oh, well, uh, on a good day, I still, you know, and a sense of seeing, effortlessly seeing the the one light or the one self through each of the individual selves.
Mhm.
Those would be some ways I would describe it.
Mhm.
And I'd say it came for me. The teacher I worked with, the Trillium teacher I worked with, is very skillful, but this awakening was precipitated on our very first session. It really came from years of Korean Zen and contemplative practice, and all the different integral practices and things that I did over the years were all preparing me for that kind of
Mhm.
final experience, which is not, it is a final experience, but then it turns out it's just another beginning as well.
Mhm.
To live that out then
Yeah.
is at least as challenging.
Mhm. Yes. So I'm not familiar with the Trillium process. Can you
Mhm.
say a few words about that?
So the Trillium Community is a community of awake men and women who have developed some tools for helping people awaken. And one of the principal tools is called something called green lighting. And green lighting is basically to encourage the student to believe and trust that spirit is alive, active, and going to win the journey toward awakening. So it's a radical yes to the belief and the experience that one is on the path to awakening. And this helps people to trust that the impulses and intuitions that they're getting are helpful, and to yield to, in a sense we strive for awakening, and in another sense we yield to it. Awakening wants to come. Union wants to come. It's our true nature. Some people say it's always already established. So there is, in one sense, striving, but in another sense, yielding. So in green lighting, we yield to that greater intelligence and beingness that wants to establish itself as our primary way. And then, so it's very, very simple. The teacher is considered important in that there's a resonance of the awakened state. Everyone is constantly, radiating transmitting their state whatever state it is. And so it's considered very important to be in relationship with a teacher, benefiting from the resonance of that awakened state, and green lighting your own process. And then I would say going through a deconstruction process that might correlate pretty well with green or construct aware, of letting go of the conventional understanding of the self-sense, the ego, allowing that to deconstruct and fall away. And so most of the people that come into the Trillium community have been at it for some time and might be in their 40s or 50s. There are younger people too, but one thing that many of them share is that they're finding that conventional life is not satisfying them, and that they are deconstructing that self-sense, is deconstructing and looking for a firmer foundation at a level of greater complexity.
I just want to breathe that in, what you just shared, because it struck me as such a clear description without being loaded with all kinds of, magical thinking or woohoo, right? It's very, very clear sense for me, and somehow reflects my own experiences as well. What I know now describe as immediate or direct experience of what you said, right? There is no an immediate experience of my interior of the outside world, and therefore no separation between the two.
No separation, and yet, yes, right, no separation. Yeah. The other thing I would say, if I can remember it now that I started speaking too early, it'll come back to me. Hate when that happens.
Yeah. So a big topic that I'm interested in actually really started me in 2001. And I remember that because it was after 9/11 when I joined the Center for Spiritual Living in Santa Rosa. I noticed that most people there were single, and actually quite a few of them, I would say were single by choice. They felt that, being a spiritual being, having a human experience is something, that's best pursued in through individualism. And even when I kind of then mentioned that most of their teachers, like Adyashanti or Eckhart Tolle, or Andrew Cohen or you. A lot of the spiritual teachers are actually married and in relationships that they followed, maybe with the exception of the Dalai Lama, of course. And in Eastern spirituality, it's often a celibate path, right, to awaken, or sometimes it is even said that you can only awaken if you live a solitary life or in the community of monks, and being in a relationship and being a homemaker is detrimental to the awakening process. And so the question often comes up, when people are interested in relationship, do we first need to awaken in order to have an enlightened or sacred or conscious or whatever integral relationship? Or how do relationships shift when, like, my marriage basically ended very mutually when I became a student of Eckhart Tolle and just wanted to pursue a more spiritual relationship and got more interested in feelings and sexuality and the interior. And my wife was just not interested at the time. So instead of making our relationship better, for me, going on my spiritual path actually led to the dissolution of my marriage.
Yes.
And so you've been married for how long?
Or 17 years.
Yes. So are you open to share a little bit how your awakening process informed your relationship, changed your relationship, and to what extent do you share your spiritual life with your wife?
Yes. Yes and yes. What I wanted to say earlier was one distinction in the Trillium community that really appealed to me was the awakening is into our relationships with all others. And so rather than this idea of awakening to a position of superiority over, that we awaken, yes, there is a upward movement and a broader vision and holding, which hierarchically may mean that there is some ascent, but that the awakened person is expected in the community to be in mutuality, to be in reciprocal relationship with everyone. And so there are many processes in place to ensure that students can file grievances and that teachers must respond to students. So not going to a place of all-knowing unfailability and perfection, but going into an awakened place from which you can serve the community and be in relationship with, which I think is very beautiful. In my own case, my path was quite that of the disaffected, relationship phobic, maybe dissociative seeker. And just to go back 30 years for a moment, when I went to my Zen teacher, when I found my Zen teacher and started practicing, I was very much relieved that Zen was a solitary path, because my relationship life was so totally screwed up, and I was so bad at it, and felt so hopeless. So here, finally, I'll just attain enlightenment, and this will fix everything else. And I look back on that, and for many people, that is their soul's calling, to live in life as a celibate or as a single or as a monk in the world. It's a beautiful calling. It was not my calling, but it was my approach for a time, and I was so relieved that there was this approach that in a lot of the traditional religious teachings encourage us to sever our ties, and Buddhists are, I might say, a little relationship phobic. If you read the traditional texts, the Buddha, just encouraged everyone that came to him to leave their partner behind and join the Sangha. And so I think we're living with the living with the continuing inertia of those teachings in our systems. So for me, I think some of the things that we bring to the path are our own brokenness, our own need for healing, our own dissociation, if that, for some people, that's more part of it than for others, a sense of spiritual bypassing, that we don't feel we're going to get what we long for through the conventional means, so we try to go around body, emotions, and mind, and go straight to the source. So we bring all that to it, and I think the healing of those tendencies can happen as you're awakening. And in my case, certainly there was a tremendous amount of work I did every year, going to therapy, going to workshops, working on myself, working things out with, before there was a wife, and then with my wife, Claire. We were lucky that we both had enough overlap that those things were possible. Certainly, I see many people who they have, when their interest in awakening really kindles, then the partner is clearly not along for the ride, and a separation comes. So I think the healing can happen as you're awakening, and after awakening. The advantage after awakening is knowing ourselves to be that great perfection, that feeling in our bones the just rightness of everything as it is, just feeling that deep sense of being held, and of everything being fundamentally right, okay, and good. That even if just glimpsed, allows for more rapid healing of the residual brokenness, a more rapid integration of whatever had been held in shadow. And that's certainly been my experience, and the experience of so many people I know, that we may hope naively that this enlightenment awakening will be a perfection and make us invulnerable to all of those to our brokenness or emotional needs or mental quirks. But actually they all come in to the clearing that's created by the awakening. And so that means that more of that work can be done. Now, I think when you're in relationship, of course, you have your stuff, their stuff, and then the overlap of that stuff and the interaction of that stuff. So you really have like three piles of dynamically shifting, moving stuff. And on a good day, right, we may be functioning out of a relatively higher second tier, touching into third tier, in radiant suchness. And on a day when everything's kind of going bad, we collapse down into our brokenness, perhaps. And then you have brokenness times brokenness equals a big pile of really difficult stuff. So so that aspect continues in my experience, and certainly I brought a lot of brokenness to awakening from early childhood, and that's part of my story, part of my path, and part of my teaching as well. But I do think it helps. Awakening helps, and it's not necessary for the healing to begin. And I would say it was very helpful to have people around me in my community, in the lower left, if you will, who encouraged me upon awakening to, yes, embrace your feelings, embrace your thoughts. In this kind of tantric awakening that I experienced, thoughts and emotions and bodily urges, sex, drugs, and, well, I don't know about drugs and rock and roll, but certainly all that the body brings to us are not problems, but are gateways into the holiest of holy places. So that was very helpful because, again, the imprint of the traditions to me suggested that I would be free from any residual ego sense, any residual self sense, and towering above the level of mundane problems like emotional difficulties.
Yeah. Thank you. So you met your wife in this Trillium community or in an awakening community?
I met my wife at university. We were both university teachers, and I met her at a faculty work day, and then we started dating and all of that, and you know, as I said, I was very lucky. She has quite a spiritual life of her own. And even to the point of I will sometimes saying, "Hey, I'm the mystic here." Some of the wonderful experiences she's had that I have not had, and so we at different times our practice life has looked a little different. But for example, there was a time in around 2005 when the Integral Community was going around offering integral weekend experiential trainings, or IWETs. And we met Hui Lam and Terry Patton and Diane Hamilton, Stuart Davis. They all came to Chicago, and we bought the Integral Life kit, starter kit, and we did the 3-body workout, Qigong, yoga, weight training, meditation. We did that faithfully for some years after that program.
Together as a couple.
Together as a couple, even sometimes getting up at 4:30 to practice before we would go into university at 7 to teach a 8 o'clock class. Wow. So, you know, I've been very lucky that way, and we've tried to make the relationship a place of practice for ourselves in a natural way. So scheduling check-in times and practicing couples puja practice, something that Arjuna Arda taught at one of the integral spiritual experiences. And Claire came to the integral spiritual experience with me one year, as did my parents. And so we've really had a wonderful life that way.
So some people may now feel, well, that sounds great, and I'm, you know, I mean, once people hear about these kind of relationships, there's often the question then, you know, where are the other people who are interested in something like that, or in a co-created path of awakening? And I'm asking a question that's rhetorical, and you know, besides my activities with integral singles and things like that, where I try to bring like-minded people together, you know, to a dedicated website for integral awake people. It often feels very difficult for people to find a partner. And then on the other side, we could say, well, if we can accept everything, you know, that we experience, then we should even be able to be with a partner who's not on a spiritual path. And whatever they may trigger in us, you know, use that as a as a process for our healing and awakening?
Well, it's such a fine matter. The the path to awakening, the developmental path, includes times of differentiation when we are finding our uniqueness, and that I like this green tea with that sweetener at this temperature, and bringing our essence into its most individuated expression.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are times of merging, and so I mean, certainly I've seen that in our marriage relationship, absolutely. And we've been through easy times, and we've been through long, difficult periods as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that the imperative of spirit to find absolute freedom, to find freedom from any limitation, is very strong and very beautiful, and maybe prototypically male to some degree, or masculine,
Or the masculine,
energetically. And so how do we say yes to that? How do we say yes to that? And can it be done elegantly, gracefully, in a committed relationship, where the other person might be on the same path, but their differentiation wave might be right at the time that you're wanting to have the merging wave? And can you get synchronized, or and so I have great respect. I mean, I have great respect for people as they are, and for the long view of finding, the experience. Each experience is priceless, and in some way contains the whole of the challenge of this time to find what is the meaningful way to live in relationship. And we're all in relationship with life, and with life in so many forms.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just wanted to say that yeah.
I really like how you pointed out, that there is the differentiation part, right, where we grow as an individual, right? Is that what I heard you say? And
Yes.
then,
Yeah.
so we might be, very comfortable and merged, or identified with, I'm Claire's husband, and we're, I'm a couple, we're married. And then there is sort of like something where one person may differentiate from that identification, or any other identification for that matter. And then if the other person, as you mentioned, still identifies with the relationship, then that may create, or it will create, some stressor in the relationship, obviously. And then when the time comes for, after differentiation, of integration, if the other person is not at that level, at that next higher level, so to speak, then it will be almost impossible to integrate with the other person at that level. Would that make sense?
I think so. And
I think I never thought about it that way. So, I mean, obviously I thought about it in just simple stage development growth, where somebody may grow from green to integral, one partner, and the other partner doesn't. But then the spiritual aspect of that then is that the person who grew to maybe a more aware level, and also has a spiritual practice, may feel guilty in a way, or challenged by not being able to accept the partner who has not made the differentiation and integration at the next higher stage. So how do we deal with that in your opinion? Or how did you deal with that in your relationship without ending it?
yes, well, I think it's quite a challenge, really. I was thinking about this earlier. it seems to me there's kind of a polarity of understanding one might have of how to relate to relationships, and with one polarity being, let's just say, the traditional Buddhist, the relationship as a hindrance, and then a little bit more relationship friendly would be relationship as a necessary evil. Right? I don't want much like it, but I do like to have sex and have a companion, so I'm going to put up with this person to get some of my needs met. And then
Yes.
the third would be to find relationship as the way, or as a way. And I think this holds whether we're talking of love relationship or just relationships, that the attempt to have a subjective relationship with the people in your life, and not just an objective relationship. This is my wife. She's the one that cooks my breakfast and cleans my house. But to have the subjective, and I don't think it's easy. And you have to work through your type as well. And you have to work through the overlapping of your brokenness and perhaps different unnamed assumptions or founding beliefs about what spiritual life is anyway. So not easy at all, but endlessly rich if you're open to it. And I think of there is that drive for transcendence and the freedom we intuit, and then we more and more know and have access to the absolute freedom of pure consciousness, the formless realm. And as we begin opening to that we know that, and we can abide in and as that. But what is abiding in and as that is this frail, limited body, which is subject to birth and death. And this represents the other pole. If there's absolute freedom, there's limitation and constraint too. And so much the relationship can be a vehicle for experiences of freedom, and for experiences of limitations and radical limitations. So if, and what I'd say I'm leaning into is the limitations can create the boundaries for the container that holds us. And if we can quit fighting the container, it can hold us. And then we have a new sense of who we are, and we can still experience the blossoming into the infinite and be held in our brokenness and our humanness by the relationship, by the other person, in that concrete form that is relationship. Does that work?
Yeah. Yes. And an additional question now came up, or image for me, and I don't want to spend the time to pull up a PowerPoint, but you're obviously familiar with the Wilbur-Combs lattice, which I think is an extremely important contribution to the integral model that was introduced in 2006 in Integral Spirituality. So that's not part of Wilbur's writings and teachings prior to 2006. And so today's topic, is in a way awakening and relationships, which would represent if you want, the horizontal part of the Wilbur-Combs lattice, going from gross to subtle to causal to pure witness to the non-dual awareness. And of course, most spiritual teachers and teachings only focus on that. We see it as a vertical growth, but in the Wilbur-Combs lattice, it's just horizontal. Right? And obviously you're a spiritual teacher, a coach, and a mentor, and this is one part of your focus, I assume, is to help people through these stages of spiritual awakening and realization. And that was part of our conversation so far. And then we have the levels of consciousness going from archaic to transpersonal and higher in integral, which for the people who are kind of familiar with it is what we usually have these colors for, right? Going from purple or magenta to red to amber or blue, and orange and green and teal or yellow and turquoise and so on and so forth, which is really separate, as we know from the spiritual IQ book from Cindy Wigglesworth, I think is her name, that really this growth in consciousness and spiritual awakening are really two separate developmental lines. And so a couple may awaken together in a spiritual sense, in what I just said, in the horizontal way, but not grow together in consciousness and grow apart there. And then, of course, we have the big issue of shadow. So as you were speaking, so like a separation in my mind happened between the spiritual awakening path, the consciousness path, and the healing path of dealing with our shadow and wounds, and what did you call it? You have a word for it, the messiness, right? Of
brokenness or messiness.
brokenness, yeah, messiness. And of course, that's what Ken Wilber adopted now. That very often people call this to wake up, to grow up, to clean up, and then ultimately to show up in sharing a purpose or doing something good in the world. So in your mentoring, and I assume you mentor singles and couples.
I do.
How do you deal with, if let's say there is a congruence in their spiritual awakening path, but the incongruence of their levels of consciousness, or also an incongruence in the level of wounding that they have, or an ability and willingness to deal with the wounding. Let's say one is more of a spiritual bypasser and just thinks, ignoring and just staying present with my emotional outbursts or difficulties. Then last week we talked about, or 2 weeks ago, we talked about attachment styles and attachment theory, which a lot of people don't want to look at. So I see now, like this picture of these three elements, cleaning up, waking up, growing up. And
well, what I would say, so I in Trillium, I work as a mentor for individuals, and that would be individuals come and they have an interest in waking up, and a mentor, they should work with a mentor and a teacher, and I'm happy to mentor folks. And then in my coaching work, I often work with couples more there. And well, I think what draws people together is so complex and so profound, and what they choose to share is totally their choice. And so I don't first diagnose their state and stage and then try to figure out. Of course, I have my intuitions about what's going on, but as you say, it's quite a complex mix of expectations that may be more or less reasonable. And if we never felt loved in a certain way, then we choose someone that we hope will do that for us, and whatever lack of fulfillments we have developmentally from our early stages, we desperately hope and assume that our new beloved will solve all those problems for us. And so I mostly try to help people see and work with their awareness to see what's happening. And then they have to really take to heart and figure out what the proper way forward is. It's because there are so many levels of need and of fulfillment that can be going on simultaneously. And I think of Jenny Wade's book, Transcendent Sex,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
she spoke of couples where one or both partners would experience a release into unitive consciousness during sex, and that
Mm-hmm.
the ground opens up and you are one with everything, and that some people will stay with a otherwise lousy partner because that moment is their moment of spiritual renewal,
Mm-hmm.
and is their God moment or their spirit moment. So um, I think it's just so complex, and my own relationship is quite complex because we're two complex, highly differentiated people.
Mm-hmm.
And I drink coffee, and she drinks tea, and uh, and that's just the beginning of many places where we don't overlap. But the
Yeah.
overlaps that we have are significant enough.
Mm-hmm. So we'd say your worldview and your level of spiritual realization are compatible.
Yes, yeah, I think that's really key. And we have enough interests in common as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time that I read everything Wilbur, and now she's reading the deconstruction of the World Trade Center, or the Trump in the post-truth era, and
Mm-hmm.
telling me about it. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually in kind of a post-Wilbur phase, and I find it really hard to read Wilbur right now.
Mm-hmm.
So we're tag teaming a little bit in terms of what our interests is, but there's enough compatibility. And if the one person is dissolving into the causal during their meditation, and the other is very much limited in their awareness to gross physical body,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that would make both partners feel a little bit like the other couldn't really understand them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
that's a difficult position to be in, because why can I not understand you? Is it because you're not in relationship with me? Or is there actually a class of experience that I haven't yet experienced? And
Mm-hmm.
if there is, does that make you somehow superior to me, or just
Mm-hmm.
different than me?
Yeah.
And if my partner is a kind of a flowing mystic that just disappears into radiance at a moment's notice, then do I just say, well, that's her, she's off on another one of her things? Um, or do I somehow feel with great appreciation for her own unique manifestation? Or do I maybe feel not so healthy a way, uh, deficient for
Mm-hmm.
my inability to join her there?
Yeah.
And I think many men, well, one man I know particularly well, myself, but many of us might benefit from a very grounded, practical partner, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe the it doesn't have to be male-female relationship, of course, but I think many times one is more grounded and practical, and the other is more uh, flowing and creative and all over the place,
Yeah.
or up
Yeah.
here, and so that might be a personality disposition, or it might be their developmental moment, or it might be that they're experiencing subtle psychic phenomena, and it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty cool to hang out with angels and
Hmm.
astral beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's very complex.
Yeah. So that just struck a nerve or a
Mm.
note in me that for years I experienced this that as I tune in more to people and learn more about other people, and uh, that they often feel understood by me.
Mm.
But then when I share, so like my inner world, maybe they're fascinated or they listen to it, and they think they understand, but I have this sense of, no, you don't really get me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard then to, they say, well, explain it to me again. What is it that I'm not getting? And I feel I'm, repeating over and over, what is alive in me? What are my concerns, right? Recently I said, I'm dating a woman right now, and I said, so when you wake up in the morning, what are your first thoughts? What is alive in you in the morning? And we realized that what I'm concerned about and what's going on in my interior is completely different. Like I would say, somewhat world-centric, right? I think about the future of humanity and how can I contribute to better the world, and and then that's not, I'm not making a value judgment here. She's very concerned about her family and her daughters, and how she can be happy as an individual and maybe bring happiness to other people. And so that creates somewhat of a loneliness in me, of being a father myself and wanting to be happy. I can very much relate to her thoughts, but she cannot relate to my thoughts. And then, so using you as a coach and a mentor at the end of our call, what do you sense? What's going on, and what is my, how do I deal with that, of feeling this aloneness of much of my inner world, where that she cannot connect with?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's a mark of spiritual maturity or human maturity to realize our tendency toward projection on others. And because of that tendency, you could say it may be that we can never actually know another's experience. That all we can do is project from our own bag of experiences onto the other. And so maybe there is a radical aloneness in our unique manifestation, that at the level of thought and at the most differentiated level, you are each of us is a one of, and there is no other that can know us. Now, and so we can be more comfortable with that or less comfortable, and it's very uncomfortable at times and initially, but maybe we can soften into that. On the other hand, it's just human nature. At times we have this experience, you so totally get me, and there's a wonderful feeling of resonance there. And if that's a projection on my part, I don't want to know, because I just enjoy that. And of course, and the third thing, at a very deep level, of course, we're both the one resonating through our individual vehicles. So of course we're in deep harmonious resonance at the core level, at the deeper level. And we can feel that and say, how amazing that we two, who emanate from the same source, can both have me, my boysenberry yogurt, and you, your lemon sorbet, such different preferences. And I don't get what you like about that boysenberry, but I respect you because I know you're human. So I think there's a lot going on. There's really a lot going on there.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot going on. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned these two things, because obviously sometimes, we just feel that we're one with another person in our interior worlds and thoughts. Right? We can't stop talking. We riff off each other. And it's just this deep knowing oneness resonance. I don't know if you find another word for that. And sometimes the way that is reflected back to me is that people often say, I don't know how to talk to you. Right? They want to, I feel they want to convince me about their inner world, and they're just confused when I talk about my inner world. They just don't get it, right? And of course, then there's sometimes self-doubt, but sometimes not. So it's just a sadness, sort of like of this feeling of aloneness, and and then I know that there is people like you or many others where there is a resonance, where we share the same concerns, worldviews, realizations, understanding. And I think a lot of people experience that in their relationships, specifically in long-term relationships, when they grow apart, and that is, of course, then a big challenge, specifically if awakening and spiritual realization is a main part of that relationship, and accepting the other, just the way they are. And I'm not talking about having different dietary preferences or exercise routines, but really talking about values and worldviews and purpose, which is a big part of my new book, having a shared purpose, enacting a shared purpose that goes beyond mutual healing and awakening and
yes.
Doing healing work and growth work and awakening work, the showing up part and showing up together part. So there's probably no definite answer how to deal with that. And many people probably struggle with that. And as you said, often you feel lucky to be with Claire, to have so much, I would assume, probably inner resonance with her.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a simple answer. I think of the Buddha upon awakening, who sat and said, I can't teach this. There are no words for what I have realized. It's impossible. Even one word is too much and a million words aren't enough. I'm adding here, but and so that's what it is to be in relationship, though, is to try to unpack for the other compassionately, and and to resist, say, a feeling of easy superiority that makes us into us versus them. Of, well, I just can't describe it, so I'm sorry. There's a truth to that, but perhaps there's a way to unpack it somewhat, but perhaps not, because even I have a friend of mine is writing a book on all the ways in which the Enlightenment concept totally misses the mark, and to try to project into what that must be like, we can't really hit the mark, because it's a state of being, and it's not like it's not something that's easily described.
It's not a mental concept, obviously.
Yeah. I used to think about the difference between being in relationship and dreaming of relationship, or scoping out a path of relationship, and you could write a wonderful treatise on the path of relationship, and then I thought of a philosopher who said philosophers design great castles in the sky and then a small hut by the side where they actually live. And that the theory is so beautiful and rounded, but then when you look at how it's enacted, it's just so real, and the smells and tastes and flavors and textures of human life are so real and so present, and the physical sense of being held, all three bodies being held by the beloved, is just extremely difficult to capture in language.
Yeah. So I sense now my takeaway from that is, from our conversation, and I always say, how can I know what I think before I hear what I say? And I'm always just expanding, listening to you, and playing off each other is maybe to know what the purpose of a relationship is. Of course, there is this, like, we meet people for a reason, a season, or a lifetime, as saying, but really to also see, is this a relationship that furthers and supports our spiritual awakening? Is this a relationship that's just about companionship and sex, which is very viable and important? Is this a relationship for psychological healing? Is it a relationship for personal growth and hopefully transformative growth into higher stages of consciousness? And or is it a relationship for sharing a greater purpose in serving the world? And the lucky ones, maybe they find a partner where they can cover all 5 dimensions, I think we have now. But also to be clear, if it's only a partial, certain parts, then to be conscious and to have clear communication about where people then pursue their own paths that they cannot very effectively share with their partner. How does that land with you?
I like that a lot. I hear you talking about purpose, which is important, and intentionality. What is the intention going into the relationship?
Yes.
And to be a little sophisticated about it and not just expect a one-size-fits-all, this partner will fulfill my needs, whatever they might be, but to be a little bit more savvy about how that's actually likely to play out. And I want to add one to your category. The number one, the biggest thing for so many people who take their path so seriously is to have fun. Who do you have fun with? How do you have fun? Because it's not, I think it should be growing up, waking up, cleaning up, showing up, and having fun too. We need to include that as well. Otherwise, it's such a serious business. And life is too serious to take that seriously.
That, without going into that, is an ongoing subject for me, and I wrote a little bit in my new book about it, because as a German, and I think I'm in Turkey right now, in Europe, this whole idea of pursuing happiness and having fun is somewhat foreign to a lot of European, and certainly to me. So when it continues for me when people ask me, what do you do for fun? I just don't really know what to say. That's a very American concept that I'm still struggling with adopting, because for Germans, everything that is fun has no value to us. To Germans, only things that are difficult have value. And so for fun that is sort of like reserved for Carnival, where for a few weeks, we're all having fun, and then we go back to our serious lives. But then when I say, well, I like to jog, and to cook, and when I say the things that I love to do and that I like, Americans then often say, well, that's fun, right? But I don't feel I jog for fun. I jog for physical health, or at least there's just like something in our cultural conditioning that blocks out that whole fun part, because we don't give it any value.
Yeah, and I not to go too far, but this is fun for me, hanging out with someone and talking about what really matters. That is a blast, and just to let go the weight of needing to be strategic with every action and every thought. To me, that's already the best kind of fun, and not a kind of numbing entertainment that takes us out of the poignancy and urgency and beauty of the moment, but a celebration of life.
I'm very, very glad that you added that, because as you can tell, this is just like not part of my normal stream of consciousness. And maybe one reason why I couldn't find a long-term partner in America, because there's just this deep cultural differences. One woman told me, you feel foreign to me. There's that's probably very often around this idea of fun and some other cultural differences. Okay, I will make a point to add it in the future.
Okay.
To the grow up, wake up, clean up, show up.
Have fun.
Which I really like, and have fun. Fun.
I think we're now ready to market this.
Yeah. All right, Bill, this was very inspiring and enlightening. And
for
how
me
can
too.
people find you if they want to connect with you?
Online, they can find me at billepperly.com or integralawakenings.com.
Awakenings with S.
Awakenings. And my contention is that the awakening life is a series of awakenings. And so we want to celebrate the integral awakenings that are integral to our awakening. Yeah.
Okay. BillEpperly.com with 2 P's and integralawakenings.com.
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you so much, my friend, and greetings over the big ocean to Chicago.
Thank you.
And to your wife.
Wonderful to be with you, Martin.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Bye for now.